If we remember that the Easter season is a time when the newly baptized are just trying to figure out what this baptized life is all about. This time is called mystagogia. Remember that great word that attempts to get us to understand that this mystery, if you will, this mystery of faith that we are now a part of, doesn't have always clear-cut, black and white, simple answers or simple solutions, or even a simple, easy path to follow. I mentioned that back in the middle of the gospel, when Jesus turns to his disciples and asks, well, who do people say I am? The story begins by saying, and on the road, it's not just to give us an idea that they're walking along and they're actually up in Caesarea Philippi, which is in the most northern part of ancient Israel. But on that road, not only Jesus walking, but on this road that we're on as disciples and followers of Jesus, that question is an important question to consider. It might have a variety of answers depending upon who we are, where we are, what contact we've had really with religion or faith or even life itself, right? Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, sometimes it just doesn't make sense at all. So on the road, he says, we need to be clear about this one question, who am I? That is a very theological question, but the responses they give indicates that they really believed that he was a prophet, one who, like the ancient prophets, had come to speak, if you will, maybe a trite phrase by now, to speak truth to power, whatever that power might be. To speak truth that has to do with this reign of God that Jesus has broken open for not only his followers, but broken open for the blind, the lame, the deaf, the oppressed. A little bit of a side, I found it interesting that watching the coronation of King Charles yesterday, that text in Luke's gospel was the text that was used. In other words, this is what it's about. Bringing sight to the blind, bringing freedom to the oppressed, healing the brokenhearted. Isn't that an interesting task to give to a king, in a sense, or any leader, or any one of us, right? And so that's the idea. The response is, you're a prophet. Well, why is Jesus a prophet? Well, because of what he was doing, right? You hear this echoed a bit in the gospel today. Why Jesus is a bit surprised. What do you mean you don't know who I am? Haven't you been paying attention this whole time that we've made this journey from Galilee to Jerusalem? Haven't you been paying attention? This is who I am, meaning not the Son of God, not the second person of the Blessed Trinity. That's not it. That's not in the gospel, but the Christians who hear it, that's what they immediately want to jump to, right? The divinity of Jesus. But what the sense is, you should know what I'm about. You should know what God is about. Well, God is about opening the eyes of the blind, opening the ears of the deaf, healing the broken, lifting up the poor, setting free the oppressed. That's who God is. God is one who acts on behalf of humanity in such way that humanity is raised up, lifted up, healed, made whole again. That's who God is. That God is not distant and apart from humanity, but in the midst of every single one of those encounters that Jesus has with the people along the dusty roads and in the towns and villages of Galilee, that God is in the midst of their lives. Maybe to the point where they never saw God. They didn't know. They didn't understand. They didn't have a way. And so that this encounter with Jesus doesn't bring them in contact with the divinity, but rather brings them in contact with, and you know, my stock phrase that God is slow to anger, rich in mercy, steadfast in love, abounding in kindness. That every encounter with Jesus brings them into contact with that being understanding, forgiving, kind. That's what they come in contact with. Maybe they never were told that, never experienced it in their life. And so the question, who is God, should have been obvious to the disciples at that point. Maybe because they hadn't really opened themselves yet to this God that Jesus was witnessing to and bringing into close contact with the people. But in any event, along the way, and remember last week, the scripture was that on the way, on the road out of Jerusalem to wherever the disciples were going, were brought back to the road again. And on the way, they were walking along, and Jesus comes and walks along with them. And yet their eyes are not open. Interesting, right? Everybody else's eyes are opened, but the disciples' eyes have not yet been opened. And so on the way again, this journey suggesting to those who are baptized, to we who are the baptized, that this journey of life that we're on will lead us in some direction, a certain direction. Obviously, that as we walk along, there are certain things that we need to be carrying along with us. And here, just to remind us again, that we carry along with us a sense that being baptized doesn't make life easy. In fact, being baptized means life is going to be difficult. And difficult not maybe in a physical sense, although that's very possible, right? But in an emotional and spiritual sense, perhaps even more so. And the reason is because when I think of the last line in the gospel, ask anything and it's going to be given to you. I bet every single one of us here has asked God for something and we've been greatly disappointed. Because it doesn't come when we want it. It doesn't come in the way that we want it. Working with the nurses, it came up in class this week. You know, that people pray and pray and pray and pray to God, and they pray and pray and pray for physical healing, and when the physical healing doesn't come, then they get upset with God, and sometimes even lose faith in God. The case study this week was of a family whose young son, an 8-year-old son, has kidney failure, and the doctor recommends that the son get dialysis. And the parents are deeply religious, apparently, in saying, no, our faith teaches us that we go to God and we take this to God, and God will heal our son. And so they leave the doctor's office and go to their church, and there at the church they ask the pastor for a faith healing. And they have absolute confidence in this scripture. We ask God, and God will give it. And guess what? Son doesn't get healed. In fact, he's worse. They have to go back. And now the son, instead of just dialysis, needs a kidney transplant. I wonder, I asked the students, what do you think the parents were feeling at that point? That seemingly God let them down. They trusted in this scripture. And I don't want to take the story too far, but it's like that happens to us on this journey. That we come oftentimes to that point where God is not to be trusted because we didn't get what we wanted, or God's not to be believed because we don't see the things that we believe should be happening, or that we don't feel peace-filled, we feel anxious and fearful and so on. That this journey, and I'm saying this because the newly baptized might have assumed that in getting baptized, they were going to be saved, meaning saved from any trouble, saved from any trial or tribulation, saved from anything that might destroy their life, whether it's disease or war or famine, whatever it might be. And so the scriptures are kind of suggesting it's not that way. If you joined this community to think that you were going to get out of all of those things, forget it. In fact, those things oftentimes come even more so, right? And yet, what the scripture here is suggesting again is, I was thinking of my experience a couple of years ago of walking the Camino in Spain. And by the third day, almost the second day, I not only was hobbling because of blisters on my feet, but walking off kilter because of the blisters threw my knee out. And so I'm walking like, a 120,000-year-old man, barely walking, not walking very fast. And I encountered this other couple, and I judged them to be older than me. I don't know why, but I judged them to be older than me. And the woman, the wife, was just walking like I was. The husband was trotting along, but she was just struggling. And I looked and I pointed to my knee, and she pointed to her knee, and she couldn't speak any English, and I didn't speak any Spanish. And then she said this. She said, "Poco y poco," little by little. And I stood there, and I didn't ask her to say anything to me. And I thought, that's it, right? That's it. In other words, just keep moving along. Little by little, you will get there. And there were times when I didn't think I was going to make it. I was ready to call a cab several times and say, forget this, I am not going to make it. And I knew that if I called the cab and the cab pulled up into the square in front of the great cathedral in Santiago, that I would never forgive myself because I didn't finish what I had started. And you see, that's a part of the Christian journey, isn't it? A part of the Christian journey said to the newly baptized is, it's interesting. I think I said this one time before. The statistics were that those who were baptized at Easter, after all of the preparation, after all of the effort, the statistic was that over 50% of those who were baptized at Easter within 6 months stopped going to church. They stopped. Perhaps because they assumed that life was going to be easy after being baptized, and the first challenge that came their way, either they didn't remember all the stuff that they had learned, or they thought, well, just give it over to God. How often we hear that phrase, right? Give it over to God. Well, that doesn't release you from any responsibility or obligation to engage with God in confronting and facing the challenge. And so that's also a part of it. In this story, it's interesting, right? That the first thing that Jesus says is, don't be afraid. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody says that to me up front, don't be afraid, what's the first thing that happens? You're immediately afraid. Right? Isn't that true how that works? Don't be afraid. Yeah, right, that's easy for you to say. Don't be afraid. Well, why? Yeah, we're going to be afraid, but how do we respond to that? Well, we respond to it by being engaged in what we know to be true, meaning to be engaged in continuing in the face of fear, to continue to be forgiving and generous and kind and loving and faithful. All those things that we know ultimately do produce fruit and bear good things. We know that. And I say, you don't have to have many of those experiences. Just one experience in your life, I think, is enough to lend the credence to that truth. That if we keep doing these things, we will eventually reach the goal or accomplish what we set out to do. Then Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And if you follow the logic in this story, which I think is one of the most convoluted arguments, it's one of these circular arguments that goes around and you think you've reached the end, and then he goes around again, and it goes around again, and it's like, okay, you and the Father are one, and the Father and I are one, and he kind of rambles a little bit, I think, a little bit there. But what's he suggesting? That if he's the way, what is the way? And the disciples think it means literally the road that you're on. And maybe that is what it means. But if he says he's the way, then how, again, you see, simple it sounds. Well, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the sick. That's all you do. Why? Because that's the way we do it. That's what we do. That's how this community operates. That this community lives and breathes what the example and model of Jesus lives and breathes the way of God. That this community is motivated, if you will, animated, even more so, by this power of God's presence and love in such a way that we know that to be truer than all the promises that are often given. And all you need to do is watch TV and watch the ads. If you try this, you'll grow hair. If you do this, you get rid of the bags under your eyes. If you do this, you'll look fit and trim. Do all of these things. And I don't know about you, but the 6th diet that I've been on, and it works for about a week, and then when I go, I want that chocolate and I want that donut, and it doesn't work anymore, it's like, you see, they peddle truth when there's no truth in it whatsoever. The truth is, do what you're supposed to do. Do what you know to be true. Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the sick. Practice being slow to anger. Be rich in mercy, forgiveness. Abound in kindness. Does that get us anything? I don't know. That's the question, isn't it? You know, if we were very traditional Christians, it's going to get us heaven. But I don't know about you, but that's the future. I don't know what that's going to be. I want it now, right? That's good Americans. We want it now. What now? Nobody wants to wait in line. Nobody wants to wait at the gates of heaven and for God to get around to deciding if I did good enough things to get into heaven. That's a very traditional view of it. I can't wait. Okay. Jesus says, then you know what you need to do. You have seen what I have done. You know what to do. That's how you do it. That's how you do it. To the newly baptized, I don't know if that instills any confidence in them, or if it instills confidence in us who've been a long time practitioners of this discipleship that we say we're a part of. Does that have to be the question? Do we get anything from what we are as Christians? Do we need to get anything from being Christian? I don't know. I know this, that being hungry, we have food to eat, having a sense that I can't do this alone is community, and having a clear picture that the path we are on comes little by little along the journey together. That's what it is. That's what it's about.